Hello, and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and today I was delighted to be joined by Iain Macintosh. Now I'm going to read from Iain Macintosh's Wikipedia page here. Fine reading. Iain Macintosh is a British journalist, author, and podcaster. Iain Macintosh has worked for ESPN, has been the editor of The Set Pieces, written for The Guardian, and has also had his articles in The Blizzard and Sports Illustrated, The Anfield Wrap, and has appeared on the BBC television programme Premier League World. He's written numerous articles and books about the computer game Football Manager, and most recently, and perhaps most importantly for our conversation, was a co-founder of Muddy Knees Media, which produces the Totally Football Show, amongst others including the Totally Football League Show, and even podcasts that aren't about football. Imagine that. In recent news, Muddy Knees Media has become a part of The Athletic, joining Tifo in a triangulation of exceptional content. No one told me to say that. I made it up myself, and I think it's true and sounds cool. So Iain joined me to talk about the history of his career, his time spent working on building sites and selling black bin bags, his first jobs in journalism, and his career all the way through to the sale of Muddy Knees Media in recent weeks, plus what he's going to be doing next. Iain is a lovely guy, and it was a delight to be able to spend an hour chatting to him about his life. And I hope those of you listening will enjoy. Anyway, before we get started today, please let me remind you that the football is back. Yes, that's right, the football is back. And as a result of that, for a limited time only, and I believe only for a few days after the release of this podcast, the 40% off an annual subscription offer for The Athletic is available. Now, that will stop. So do get in there before the end date, which I wish I knew, but I don't, because that would be too professional for this. But if you visit theathletic.com/Tifo, you'll be able to get a subscription to The Athletic for what is the equivalent of £3 a month in the UK. And you can join the triangulation crew. Yeah? That's a good one, isn't it? But do please do that. Anyway, without further ado, I will leave you in the warm embrace and the cool hands of Iain Macintosh. Have you always loved football, Iain?
Yeah, from very, very early on. And I always knew I was really bad at it as well. There was a very early move to playing goal all the time, because that was the only way I'd get a game, because no one else wanted to dive about on concrete and I couldn't kick in a straight line.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it was terrible, but I sort of went straight into nerd mode right from the beginning. You know, I'd be watching games on ITV on Sunday and then writing my own little match reports in scraps of notepaper and showing them to friends at school who really couldn't care less, which was to be, I guess, a harbinger of my future journalistic career.
Do you still have any of those scraps of paper?
I don't, no. I've got some from... I had a kind of sixth form college football newspaper about our five-a-side league that was called Dodgy Tackle. And I found that in a box somewhere during lockdown tidy up.
How was the quality of your writing at the
time? Pretty poor.
What were you doing? Why was it bad?
It was just match reports on five-a-side games, and some bits were quite interesting, and some bits were pretty horrific. So again, very little changed over the next 20 years.
Do you feel like when you look back at writing like that, you know, people who are in therapy, for example, might look back at a diary entry that they'd written 10, 15 years ago and glean something significant from it. When you look back at old writing about football, what do you learn from it about your football writing journey?
I always look back on stuff and I think, like, particularly the stuff that I wrote when I was younger or when I first started writing professionally, which wasn't until I was 29. And I think, how are you so sure about everything? I was so forthright in the early days. And I think towards the end of it in 2017, I found it really hard to be forthright on anything, because I think the more that you find out and the more people you talk to and the more perspectives you get, the less certain you are of anything. But I think that's true outside of journalism as well.
Yeah, that's true. You also grow into being more self-conscious the more that you develop an awareness of the surrounding world. I think that's true of musicians as well. Like, you get when people are in their sort of teens and late teens, they'll write songs that are incredibly gushing about the way that they feel, but by the time they get to their mid-20s, they're suddenly too embarrassed to sing them. I wonder if there's something along those lines.
No, I think there's definitely something in that.
Yeah. So you were 29 years old when you started writing about football professionally. How did you make that leap?
Completely by accident, really. I did a degree in journalism studies at the Falmouth College of Arts, but I kind of let myself down by very rarely turning up. And the only smart thing I did was about halfway through the third year, I started applying for jobs in journalism. And then I was doing interviews sort of through March and April, and then got offered a job. So, I went to the lecturers and said, look, is there anything to stop me taking this job? Because it's a job in journalism in London. That's kind of why I did all this. And they're like, well, you've got to finish your dissertation. So fine, I'll finish it by the end of the week. Like, well, you can't just leave. But I did just leave.
What was the job?
It was, I had 3 job interviews, and one was at Match magazine in Peterborough. One was at the new PlayStation 2 magazine in Bath, which gives you an idea of how long ago it was. PlayStation 2 hadn't launched at that time. And the other was for a small business-to-business sort of business news startup website in Old Street. And I got to the final 6 of PlayStation 2, the final 2 of Match magazine, and didn't get either of them. So I ended up writing about business news.
Wow. But what kind of stories?
Well, it was really just, it wasn't really a journalism job. It was sort of going through, it was like a night shift job, and you get a pile of papers starting with the FT. And then you'd sort of basically read it and praise-say it specifically for corporate clients. It was every bit as exciting as I'm making it sound. And the first day I started was the day that Boo.com went under, the Swedish clothes online retailer.
Yeah.
And everyone said, well, that's it. Told you the internet was busted flush. It's just like the South Sea bubble all over again. No one's ever going to buy clothes on the internet, idiots. And about a year later, that was the end of my job, and the intervening years were spent on building sites and a security guard, and a memorable period selling black bin bags, which I was really good at, by the way. That's probably of all the jobs.
Literally like what's the Peter Kay show where they sell black bin bags?
Come and get your black bin bags.
Phoenix Nights. I mean, literally like Phoenix Night. Were you singing as well?
That was pretty much all anyone sang at me when I turned up at the pub while I was doing that. It never got old. Never got old.
No, now I feel bad for saying it. What was your selling technique? How do you sell can you sell me one now?
Yeah, well, what I had a discount stick. So I'd tell people about the black bin bags. And I'd find if I was selling to a restaurant, I'd be like, there's nothing worse, is there, than pulling a big bin bag out at the end of the night and having it split and go all over the floor. These bin bags are a little more expensive, but how much would you pay just not to have that happen again? And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to get out my discount stick. And I'd always go, what? I'll go, it's my discount stick. Here it is. And I'll go. It
sounds almost threatening in a way.
I think it was. And it would be like, that's the sound of interest-free credit. That's the sound of free delivery. That's the sound of 10% off because I like you. Are you in? And
that's a very 90s audio burn right there as well. I feel like that tone really sets it in a particular time. You're clearly a man made for audio.
I don't know. I think I've got quite a sort of nasally, annoying voice.
So does Jon Ronson thinks that too?
Does he?
Yeah, about himself.
Oh, right. I was going to say, well, never had a row with him. I think Jon Ronson's got a silly voice. Fine. It's war. So I've never, I'm one of those people who doesn't really enjoy listening to himself. And I had to a bit at the beginning because I kept doing things like saying a lot and having meandering sentences that went nowhere, and I had to sort of hammer it into myself to be a little more articulate and controlled, with mixed results, it has to be said. But yeah, I think I like storytelling. I love a good story. And audio, particularly now, gives you such a great opportunity to do that in so many interesting ways. It opens up because of the internet and because of the way we take our content. There's so many different voices now, so many people from so many different backgrounds. it's not something I ever really gave too much thought to before sort of Muddy Knees Media and everything. But now's a really exciting time for that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it's almost primal in a sense, isn't it? Well, tell you what, let's come back to Muddy Knees Media. I'm curious, you did your journalism degree between 26 and 29, was it?
No, my journalism degree I did between 18 and
I see.
And
so
20.
You mean you didn't actually start your current career until you were 29?
Yeah, I had, as I say, some years in the wilderness.
Right, okay. And what were you doing on the building sites? Building?
I was a Sparks mate, which means basically you don't know anything about electricity, so you're not allowed to touch, but you can carry things for electricians.
Cool.
And again, that was every bit as fun as it sounded. It was a lot more fun in the summer, I'll tell you.
Do you know the stereotype of a building site is that it's very sort of masculine and people, are sort of cruel in a boyish way to each other and they're all laughing and being laddie. Is that true? Did you, if so, did you enjoy that and fit in?
Well, I used to turn up for work with a rolled up copy of The Guardian under my arm, so I think that probably...
You were the Graham Lasso of the building site.
Yeah, completely. That was very rarely intact by the end of the day. But it was fine. You learn a lot of lessons on a building site. Some are painful, and some are more simple ones. I always go back to the fact that my boss on the building site, he used to go to the same school as me, same comprehensive school in Essex, and he was expelled at the age of 15. I cannot remember what for, but he, out of school, he went to technical college. He taught himself how to be an electrician. He worked his nuts off. And then by the time I came out, with my rolled up copy of The Guardian, he was my boss and he was earning a fortune. He was earning, this was sort of, when was it? 2002? Yeah, 2002, because I listened to the World Cup on the radio. And he was earning £100,000 a year. And it was, one of the first moments where you realise that cleverness, intelligence, things like that, they're not predicated by how well you did at school. There are a lot of extremely well qualified people who are as thick as mints, and there's a lot of people who didn't do well in school who are geniuses. Yeah,
it's almost as if it's all a lie, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Hey, so 29, what was your first job that you would recognise as being part of your current career?
So I got a job at The Independent when I was about 25 on the syndication desk, which is essentially you go through your own paper and you try and sell stories, interviews and things to other papers and magazines and such like. And that gave me a really good grounding in what editors actually want.
Did you also have a discount stick for that? Or?
No, that was very much frowned upon in this environment.
Right. Yes, okay.
It was kind of less boiler roomy and more professional. But I think when I came to be a journalist, I had a really good understanding of editors and what they wanted, because I've spoken to so many of them, and you realise that they want to fill the pages. They want to fill the pages with good stuff, and then they can get on with worrying about the next thing. So throughout my freelance journalism career, I wasn't really very good as a journalist, but I was good at hitting deadlines and providing the kind of copy that they had actually asked for and not creating any other problems. And I think that probably had more to do with the longevity of my freelance career than any actual talent. So that was handy. I went from there to a job at a website that was called icons.com, which was wonderful people doing diaries of famous footballers. And I think the original business plan was that people would pay like £1 a time to read 250 words from Dennis Bergkamp or Ryan Giggs. That didn't take off so much. What did take off was the merchandise, the signed shirts that they got from the players. And again, some syndication. We're making newspaper stories out of the interviews. And I realised quite soon that we probably weren't going to be able to hit any of the targets just selling the interviews of what increasingly was, less Dennis Bergkamp and more George Boateng. And we had to do other stuff, and we had writers there, really good writers. And I went round all the existing clients saying, look, what else can we do for you? What gaps can we fill? How can we help? And one editor of a Singaporean newspaper was looking for sort of, colourful, controversial stuff. So one weekend I sat down and I wrote a a particularly nasty piece about Ashley Cole and the swerving off the road at the idea of a £55,000 wage. I sent it as an example of what the team could do if they, if they were put to it. And the editor said, "Who wrote this?" And I admitted it was me. And he said, "Can you do one of these every week?" So for the back end of the 2006-2007 season, I had a column in a Singaporean tabloid newspaper called The New Paper. And I wasn't getting a penny for it because it was my job to sell stuff. It was just, in this instance, I was kind of writing the stuff I was selling.
Getting the practice. What other examples of pieces were there if they were all sort of controversial?
I think that I remember one that I first got abuse on the internet for, which was where I was comparing Carlos Tevez and Mark Viduka in terms of effort and work rate, and pointing out that Mark Viduka's goal-scoring streaks tended to be shortly before a contract expired and at no other time. And I got a message on the internet that read simply, "Fuck off, Macintosh. Viduka owns your mum." It was the first kind of, I don't know that person. Why are they so cross with me?
Right, yeah. Also a terrifying state of affairs. I think, owning another human being is...
Yeah, I know. And to what end? And then you just don't want to think any more about it.
No, no, exactly.
So yeah, there were things like that. And at the end of that season, they offered me a job as a sort of UK correspondent, which meant that I went... It was the weirdest thing. Like, most people's first game as a journalist is kind of, with the local paper doing Chelmsford City or something. And my first game was the Emirates Cup in 2007. I think Arsenal against Valencia or something. In a press box that's like a 5-star hotel. And of course, in these days, there was no Twitter or anything. The only thing you knew of journalists, if you knew anything at all, was their byline picture, which was invariably about 10, 15 years out of date. So it was just going into this industry and knowing absolutely nobody and absolutely nothing. I remember writing letters. It's 2007, so there's no excuse, but I wrote 20 letters to every press department of every Premier League team explaining my situation. And I'm a journalist and I have no idea what I'm doing. What do I do now? I think only 3 clubs actually responded.
Do you remember
God
which
bless
clubs?
all of them. Everton was definitely one of them, which is one of my many reasons for having a soft spot for Everton. And I think Man City and Portsmouth were the other 2, but I'm not sure.
Diverging success after that.
Very much so. Different paths, sliding doors. But the only person I recognised was Brian Glanville. And he taught me a very important lesson as well, because I went over to him and said hi and how much I'd always admired him. And he spent 20 minutes asking me about me, and what I was doing and what I thought about the game and what I thought about Arsenal. And he was so incredibly charming. And then he wrote it all down
in his match report.
Oh, good God, no. The man's a master.
Yeah.
There was one game. I'm sorry, I'm going off on a massive tangent.
No, please do.
I love telling this. I sat next to Brian Glanville at an Arsenal game in my first season, and he had nothing in front of him. I'm sat there with my laptop. I've got my little Playfair football annual. I've got a notepad. I'm doing a minute by minute in scrappy freehand. I've got 8 windows open. I've got all sorts of things going on. Brian is there with nothing. And then about 20 minutes in, he pulls out his gas bill and he scribbles a couple of things down that I can't even read. He's talking all the way through the game. He's telling jokes. He's talking old stories. I'm sort of banging on thinking, how on earth is he going to file? Like, he works for the Sunday Times. About 10 minutes before the end, he pulls out this mobile phone the size of a brick and he just goes, "Excuse me, I just have to file." And he taps in a few numbers and he goes, "Glanville, 0124. And he takes a breath and he just goes, "On a bright sunny day at the Emirates Stadium, Arsenal were given a chasing." And he reads out a 600-word article, and halfway through, he's going, "How am I doing? 520, good. Leon Osman in the centre battled like a Spartan." And And he's done the whole thing. And he puts the phone down, the final whistle blows, and off he goes.
Wow.
And I'm still sitting there with pages of notes, things aren't into shape, and he's just bested me with only his voice. That's 50 years of experience right there.
Do you think anyone at 50 years of experience can do that, or do you think that's a special talent?
I think it's all about the personality. And again, as with so much inside journalism and outside journalism, the thing with Brian was that he retained his enthusiasm for football, and he still does. I think he's still in press boxes even now. I saw him at QPR a year or so ago. He's still as excited about football as he was when he was a kid, which is remarkable. There's quite a lot of people who don't retain that excitement after about 3 years on the job.
Yeah. No, I've certainly. I don't go to matches or anything. I don't have the same job that you guys have in the past, but I find it personally difficult to retain excitement for football at times. I don't know about you.
I used to have to make a point of it because, like anyone else, I can be capable of a whinge at times, but I used to try and make a thing of every single stadium I went into. Just sort of stopping outside and looking at all the fans going in and reminding myself that they were paying probably more money than they had to go and watch this game of football, which might be complete crap. They were going to get stung for, beer and pies and whatever else, and a programme. They were paying a fortune to go and do this. And not only was I getting it all for free, including the food, but I was being paid to get there. Someone was paying my train ticket. Someone was paying my wage for doing it. And I try and make a point of reminding myself every single game. And also I had my Wembley cigarette back in the days when I was smoking, where I'd get off at the Tube and walk down Wembley Way very, very slowly, enjoying a cigarette and just thinking back to every cup final I'd ever watched on TV and thinking, you get paid for this now. You get paid to go to cup finals.
You're being very present.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I had that I thought was a disadvantage but might have been an advantage was having spent all that time selling black bin bags, I knew what everything else in the world was like, or everything else in my world, everything else in the UK. I knew that most jobs weren't fun. Most jobs didn't involve watching football for a living. And so I think I appreciated it a lot more for that time away. And I can't speak for anyone who sort of went straight from university into an internship and into, top level football writing. But I think, I've done jobs in Halfords and Chelmsford High Street, stacking sort of 1,000 tins of car paint across a hot afternoon in a scratchy polyester shirt with my name badge on. And when you've done a bit of that, suddenly, a trip to Burnley on a wet Saturday afternoon isn't really the worst thing in the world. In fact, a trip to Burnley is never the worst thing in the world. The view from the press box is incredible.
Right. I was just thinking...
provided it's not aeroplanes trailing racist
I was thinking that, I was just thinking as you were talking about jobs I've done before, it struck me that I was going to say that I worked in a pub for a number of years. I probably watched more football for my job then than I do now. But then as you were describing the Halfords job, I remember being a teenager. I worked as a farmhand in North Wales. And it was quite fun. The farmer was terrifying and he just smoked weed all the time and he would never pay me. He's the sort of guy who'd be topless always, and he would walk through this field of cows or bulls and just smack them on the arse. No fear. There was a water buffalo there. But the worst thing was in the summers, we would do hay baling. And I would get paid extra for this. I'd get paid £5 an hour instead of £3 an hour for hay baling. And it was the most excruciating job I think I'd ever done. Like, it was, in the blistering heat, 10 hours a day, every day, you would lift these hay bales. You'd be lucky if you had gloves. So if you didn't, your fingers would be torn up by the end of the day. And because the hay at its stage is very sharp, and you're sunburnt, when you go home and get in the shower, it stings like you're being covered in acid, because you suddenly realise you're cut all over your body with where the hay has kind of stabbed you. It was the hardest job I've ever had. I think I was 14, 15 years old. I mean, it was quite fulfilling in a way, but it is definitely better to watch football, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. And I'm not saying I never moaned. I definitely moaned about things, but you catch yourself moaning and then you think back to that or McDonald's on Chelmsford High Street on a Friday night, walking around with your mop and trying not to get punched in the face. I think, yeah, you know what? Life's all right. Life's okay. We're doing all right.
Yeah. All right. Well, so you were at the Independent for a while. You moved on. What did you do between then and Muddy Knees Media?
So I worked for the new paper for a few years, and they were great and gave me an opportunity to, say, get on the circuit and go to games and meet people. Twitter came along, which probably made quite a big difference because it was easier then to sort of put yourself about and get your name known. I started doing freelance and did some work for ESPN and was lucky enough to be offered a job by them in, I think, about 2013. Sort of things came along, little bits of TV or little bits of radio, and the set pieces, of course.
My first football writing bit of money.
Oh, it was, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Thanks for that.
No problem at all. I wanted to have good imaginative stuff. I wanted to pay people. I was very, very big on, always have been very, very big on making sure that everybody gets paid. At Muddy Knees Media, even the work experience kids got paid London living wage to make sure that, I think if people are working for free, they'll want to do it for a short period of time, and then eventually it will become the sort of least important thing in their life, quite understandably.
Yeah.
It's a kind of selfish thing as well as not wanting to exploit people, but it also means that you get access to people that perhaps you wouldn't ordinarily get access to. You prevent having the same old voices coming in because, they're the voices of people whose parents can look after them while they're doing internships. So that was always a big thing, and getting people paid for doing freelance was a big thing. I think I look back at the set pieces and I made so many mistakes right from the start that I think I could have done that a lot better.
Like what?
I don't think there was no consistency on it. There was no, it was only when we started doing the Championship Manager stories that people had a reason to come back and check.
Like a USP?
Until then, I think, or just an idea. I think, like anything in business, it's all about what do people need and why am I the best person to supply that need? And when you're changing your tone and changing your approach, as often as I was at the set pieces at the start, it's very difficult to, you can't serve someone's need if you're not supplying a single need. You're just sort of throwing interesting ideas up against a wall. I often think if I could go back and do that again, how differently I would do it. But, a lot of the stuff that I learned there came in extremely handy when I started Muddy Knees Media.
So it was the thing that, I suppose, the place that you learnt the lessons beforehand.
Yeah, you only really learn by making mistakes. Hideous mistakes.
It's
it really
the worst
does.
thing about learning. Okay, right. Muddy Knees Media then. It's an interesting dynamic, not just because of how successful Muddy Knees Media has become, but also because of the position you were in, presumably, when you began. I know you as a football writer, which is not what you are now. So that's quite a big shift. And Seb and I were chatting beforehand about this, trying to think of other people who've made a similar sort of move and it been as successful as yours has. And we can't really think of that many people. What spurred you on to make such seems like a kind of a drastic change, and maybe it didn't feel like that to you at the time, though.
No, it felt drastic, but it also felt right. I think while I've been doing the set pieces, I've been doing a few other things as well. Sort of setting up Q&As, taking contracts with, sort of corporate clients who wanted to put on events, because I had a phone book full of ex-footballers that I'd done things with in the past, and you put them together, and it was an interesting sideline. Yeah, I guess so. I might not word it like that, but
no, I did that on purpose to be cruel.
That's accurate. I was David Squire's agent. I like everyone else, I'd seen David on Twitter during the 2014 World Cup, and this was shortly before I started the set pieces, and I was desperate to get him on there. And I couldn't do that, so I sort of got in touch and said, look, you're brilliant. I love you. You should do a book. And we sort of went back and forth. And I said, look, I know a few people in publishing. I'll go out. I'll be your agent. I'll be your Mr. 10%. I don't think we ever even signed a contract. And I just went out, pitched his book, and got him a really good 2-book deal. I think pretty much the first person I spoke to.
Oh, well, that's an easy 10%, huh?
So it was...
I bought that first book, actually.
It's brilliant.
It is good.
Everything he does is brilliant. Sickening man. He's wonderful. He's really lovely. It was little things like that were really exciting me. Just going out and pitching an idea and trying to make stuff happen. And I don't know, it was scratching an itch that I don't think I had in journalism.
What is that, entrepreneurial ship, is it? Or
yeah, I guess so. I don't think I saw it in those kind of terms. I just had an urge to do stuff, and I think I might have been coming to a point where, and we've talked about how amazing football journalism is and what a great job it is, but there was a lot of travelling up the M1, going to a ground, doing the match report, hitting send, getting in the car, back down the M1, and it didn't really sort of go anywhere. You went and you did your job and you enjoyed your job and you did it and you hit send, and shortly after you got home, that article had been read by all the people it was going to be read by, and then it was on to the next thing, and there was never any... What
is the natural endpoint? It within the sort of career perspective of that, do people ascend to editor, or is there somewhere that you kind of naturally go along that track, or is that, when in football writing, is that kind of where most people stay?
Well, I think there's different routes, and it's not for everyone. It's a huge strain if you have a family, because you lose your weekends. But yeah, some people go onto the desk and rise up as sub editors and sports editors, and some people shift off into writing books. And when I'd started, I was so excited about being there that when people used to say, where do you think you'll be in 20 years? I'd always say, we're still doing this. I'm still doing this in 30 years. And if I can do this until I get carried out the press box, then that will suit me just fine, because what better way is there to spend your life? And by the end, I wasn't really feeling that anymore. It's also one of the reasons why I took myself off the Totally Football show very quickly, and used myself only as an emergency guest, because I knew that it wasn't there anymore. The thing that sort of propelled me along for most of my time as a football journalist was fading, and I was getting more of a kick from doing deals and trying to build things, and it wasn't right for me to be in the studio anymore.
It's very interesting to hear you say that. That's I mean, it sounds like you're thinking about it from quite a creative perspective, and I suppose that's something that happens to lots of people. People deal with it in better and worse ways. It sounds like you dealt with it in a very good way, right? By creating something which is as successful as Muddy Knees Media.
It was, I think there was the desire to build something. We had the building blocks. We got the best presenter in the world. I don't think my broadcasting career could ever be described as anything more than modest, but I worked in a lot of places with a lot of people. And there's no one in James Richardson's class. He is so sharp. He will drop jokes that you won't even notice because they come in too quickly and under radar. So to have him was, an incredible thing. And with him, you haven't just got a mainstream football show. You've got Galazzo, which I think of all of the things we did was one of the most loved Muddy Knees Media shows. And we had producer Ben. And there was. I can say this now, but there was opposition internally with, some of we didn't have a lot of money, but we had a few shareholders who come in and supported us at the beginning. And, they're looking at the business plan and saying, well, what are you paying the producer such a big salary for? You can just get an engineer. And I've never been able to get my head around this. The fact that people don't appreciate producers and what they do, and they set the tone. They control the cadence. They are the kind of heartbeat of the show. Without a good producer, you just end up throwing crap against a wall, like I did with the set pieces. You don't have any sense of kind of development and evolution and voices coming in at the right kind of times. And you have a hell of a lot to worry about, because with someone like Ben, you have someone who's, trained in commercial radio. He's legally aware. He knows what you can say and what you can't. He knows when things go on too long and when they don't. And between him and Jimbo, that was an absolute unstoppable team. And I felt that if we could take that, and it was a big if we could build one show, then we could build two, and then we could build three. If we could build three and get a reputation for building shows, we could do different shows about things that weren't about football. And if we could be good in audio, then why couldn't we do more than podcasts? Why couldn't we look at doing audiobooks? And if we had people who were listening to the show, then why couldn't we have people online reading a website? And if we had people reading a website, then why couldn't we have people reading a book? And so on and so forth. Looking back, we didn't have anywhere near the resources to do any of those things. And the original business plan was to do the Totally Football show for a year, and I would continue working as a journalist. And then in the second year, we might have a look at doing a football league show. And in the third year, we had this idea about this sort of classic Italian football show. And in the end, the audiences were just so big right from the start that I had to take the decision of ending my football journalism career, which I wrestled with for about 3 months and knew was the right thing to do as soon as I'd done it. And actually just put the pedal down and really, really go for it.
So can I go back a little bit and ask about how the opportunity to create Muddy Knees Media came about? Because as you say, like it very, very quickly became a huge, big deal. Which, it sounds in some ways like it was a bit of a surprise to you, or that there was a question around whether that would be the case or not. But how did the opportunity present itself, and how was this? How did the structure work? Who did you start it with, and who was the original crew?
Well, I didn't know anything about it at the end of the preceding season. I told my daughter that, we were going to have a really lovely summer, no international tournament. She was 2017, she was 6 at the time. I'd have loads of time to spend with her. And then, I became aware that people weren't as happy as they had seemed and were looking at going away and doing it differently and doing it on their own. Given that I've been doing things elsewhere like the set pieces and had a bit of a taste for it, there was kind of conversations about, well, how would this work, how would it go? And I don't know, I kind of probably didn't think too deeply about it. I just always kind of thought it would work and didn't really question it. I think sometimes you kind of war game things in your head, don't you? You think, well, if I was doing this, how would I do it? And my feeling was that I thought audio was going to get bigger. I didn't have any idea how big or how quick. It accelerated way beyond anything I expected. And I thought that if every component was charged up, if everyone really went for it, like on a commercial level, on a marketing level, on a branding level, on just on everything, if they just went for it like it was the only thing that mattered, what could you do? What could you achieve? And I think the thought of that quite excited me. It terrified me too, because I knew, I'm not an idiot, I knew it was going to go down very, very badly. And I think, you'd have to ask the others, but I think they all knew that it was going to cause some issues. And there was a lot of wobbling, sort of through the back end of July. I think every person apart from me had a major wobble and thought, actually, is this the right time? So I had a pre-planned holiday, I think it must have been the very end of July. And we didn't have everyone in position. We had, I don't think I've ever said this, we had a potential backer who would have really given us a lot of security who dropped out. And we had to scramble about for replacements, which is why, we launched with so little money in the bank. I think it was enough for about 12 episodes, and
Wow.
that was all we had.
Yeah.
It was insane. Looking back, even knowing what I know now, I'm not sure I'd do it again. It was so reckless. And we just just sort of jumped off the side, and kind of went from there. It was all kinds of terrifying. But with Jimbo, I'm sat there in the, I think it was the Maple Street Studios, the morning of the very first show, and I'm sweating and running outside to smoke and coming back in and legs twitching and everyone's looking like naughty school children. And Jimbo walks in, he's got like a paper bag full of posh cakes, and he looks like he's just gone for a stroll in the park. Morning, everyone. How you doing? Downstairs we go. Everyone gets into the studio. A little red light goes and he just takes a breath. He goes, "Live and in high infidelity." And that was it. We were off, and we'd been asked by potential commercial partners, what audience we thought we were going to get. And I'd said, well, I don't know. I mean, I genuinely don't know what to say, but let's say 20,000 for the first episode. And maybe we'll build up from there. We did 20,000 in about 15 minutes. We were through six figures within a couple of hours. It just took everyone aback.
That's amazing.
It made it a lot easier to sell advertising after that. And the next thing was seeing that one show had done well. We didn't have any money. And we had sponsors who were sort of slowing the burn rate of cash, but we weren't making money for the first few weeks. And I wanted to do a Football League show because I'm a Southend fan. No one ever talks about Southend or any of the other clubs. So we just decided to do it. We thought that, I covered for James Richardson once. I'm sure I can do it. So I got in the studio. We got Matt Stanger in. He's brilliant. Ben produced it. And I think the whole show cost us about 50 quid. No, tell a lie. We had Alex McLeish on the first one and we took him out for lunch.
Right.
And we went off on that, and that's getting a big audience as well. And suddenly you're thinking, we're going to have to rip up like the old business plan because it's completely out of date. This thing's accelerating. So I think from about October, November, December, I'm kind of thinking, well, I don't think I can be a football writer and run this business. Because already by that point, by the time winter's drawing in, I'm in the office at 6 a.m, trying to get ESPN work done, trying to write the Totally Football League show, trying to watch videos of Football League games, trying to do absolutely everything. I was working harder than I've ever worked in my life, and you can't half-ass two thise, and something had to give. So as I say, I thought it backwards and forwards and inside and out because football journalism was a job that I wanted to do since I was a kid, being crap at football. Was I really, having worked so hard and got to a point of relative stability, was I really going to give it all up? And I thought, well, maybe the sensible thing, I've obviously got, the company's been set up, quite a lot of the money that's gone into it was from my ISA. I've got quite a lot of shares in the company. Maybe I should just hire someone to run it and then get on with my career. But the thought of that was like thinking, maybe I can hire someone to make love to my wife. I mean, that would save me some time, wouldn't it? I couldn't do it. So I finished up. It was nice, actually. The first football match I ever watched was the 1986 FA Cup final, Everton-Liverpool. And the last match I ever did as a journalist was Liverpool-Everton at Anfield, which was 1-1 thanks to Sam Allardyce getting a 94th minute equaliser with about their only shot on target, which infuriated Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah, and all the journalists with their deadlines.
Yeah, and that was it. And that was the end of the writing. And on January 2nd, I was in our little office in Jazz FM, a little sweat box in the basement, mocking out how we were going to go forward, what we were going to do. How we were going to diversify. I think I've still got the business plan here. About launching. I just pulled it up on my screen. Launched the Totally Italian Football Show. Investigate a film-focused podcast. Create pilots for food and classic music pods. Yeah, we did that. That did not work out.
So you wanted to diversify away from football?
Very quickly, very, very quickly, because with the best will in the world, football fans have only got so much time. The most recent figures about podcasting say that people who listen to podcasts listen to 4 or 5 podcasts. I think that's not a general number. I think generally people listen to about 2. I think there are some people like you and I who listen to about 10, maybe even more. But I think most people probably listen to 2, maybe 3. It's something for the commute. And you can't just go on making football shows hoping to shift one audience to the next show to be, you can get people to listen to the Totally Football show and the Totally Football League show, and maybe Galazzo as well. But after that,
not the fourth one.
It's going to get harder and harder. So we needed to do new stuff. And one of the things I was most passionate about was doing a history show. I wanted to do a history show for people like me who went to comprehensive school or people who went for fee-paying schools and didn't really listen, people who just didn't have an access point for history. And that's how we came to work with Greg Jenner and how we set about making You're Dead to Me, which went on to be one of our most successful shows. I think it's the second most listened to show on BBC Sounds now.
So what else have you got in the roster for people who don't know your stuff beyond the football? What else have you got?
Well, we had 6 football shows when the Athletic came in to buy us, but we had, I think, 8 other shows ranging from subjects like history. We had a Radio 4 show, homeschool history. We actually had 4 BBC commissions by the end.
Wow.
So our income was diversified into 3 streams.
You were the people taking all of those. That's why there was none for me.
We had a run of form. We had the football shows were making income largely for advertising, the BBC shows through the commission fees, and we were getting stronger and stronger in branded content for corporations, other organisations, third-party podcasts, which were across such diverse elements as responsible beauty and horse racing and all sorts of things. So I think January 2018 was the time when it became a proper production company rather than 2 big podcasts. And it spread out. And that also marked the time that I started to step back from the football. Because we had 2 rules of getting people in the studio for the Totally Football show. They had to be experts. And we found at the beginning, we tried loads of things to be different and not all of them worked. And one of them was that we had brilliant comedians coming in like Josh Widdicombe and Matt Ford, who they knew their football. They were really funny. They were great broadcasters. But we were made aware by the listeners that they were listening to hear experts on football talk about football.
Yeah, you had your niche. Not so much of a niche.
we needed to make sure that everyone in the room was an expert, and we needed to make sure that everyone in the room loved football and was enthusiastic about it. There's plenty of places where people who don't really like football talk about football.
Hello.
Like any match. Any match that Alan Green is commentating on. Or if he does, he just doesn't sound like he
hides it really well.
I don't want that. I want upbeat. And I couldn't do either of those things. I wasn't watching enough football, and I was more concerned with running the business. So I became very much like emergency backup presenter. Because then you don't have to actually tell people stuff. You get other people to tell people stuff. It just sort of broadened and widened from there. And it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
How does that make you feel, though, if I can stop on that for a second? That because you're basically accepting that other people are better at sort of presenting or doing something than you. As a man who I mean, you are a good presenter. I've listened to episodes that you've hosted. You're very good. You're a very good talker, for example. Is it made easier to accept those things when James Richardson is the person that you're surrendering to, or like, is there something on a serious note? Is there something that you need to develop as an adult to accept that other people can do things better than you?
Yeah, I mean, I think very few people could sit in a room with James Richardson and legitimately say, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
But I think it was, I've always tried to have a thing, get good people to do stuff that they're good at. If you want someone to present a show, get a presenter. If you want someone to write a book, get a writer. And it wasn't good enough for me to be doing it. It needed someone who was brilliant. So the easiest.
So what are you now then? Like, if you're not the writer anymore, you're not the presenter. Like, how do you need to categorize yourself, or if you did, what would it be?
I categorize myself as everything else. Someone needed to make sure that there was public liability insurance, so that if anyone tripped down the stairs,
yes,
the company wouldn't be sued into a black hole in space. Someone needed to make sure that when invoices came in, they were actually being paid. Someone needed to make sure that the burn rate didn't outstrip the income, drive the company into a wall.
The boss man.
It was just a sort of everything else man, really. And I found that, James was the best person in the room to present the show, and would be in any room he was in. Ben was the best person to produce it, and that left me to go and do all the other stuff.
Well, that is an interesting thing, though, because, and I'm sure you will have noticed this as well, but particularly, and I imagine this is the case in every single industry, but where people are experts in something or are particularly good at something, you tend to find quite a lot of ego as well. So it's like I'm picking that up as worthy of note, because there is a lot of humility in the position that you have taken as the everything else person. Like, there doesn't seem to be a lot of ego attached to that, which in my experience is kind of unusual.
Oh no, privately it's enormous. It's a raging beast. No, it's pragmatism.
Right.
You're running a business. You're not running your own personal profile. And this was the reason that I was very rarely on Twitter after Muddy Knees Media started, and eventually just stopped logging in, because there was no requirement on me to keep my profile. In fact, the only thing that could happen is that it could go horribly wrong. The only thing that could happen is I could say something stupid and drive the business down, which was more than possible. So it was just things like that. And when you're motivated by abject terror that if this thing goes under, it's the only thing that people will ever remember about you, and there will be a long line of people waiting to throw poo at you. That's quite a motivating force to make sure that every bit of the business stands up.
Yeah, no, fair enough. That makes sense. Hey, well, let's move on to the offside rule as an example of a property which you sort of did you acquire the offside rule? What's your relationship with that podcast?
Yeah, we always loved the people on it. We had Lindsay Hooper on the Totally Football show loads, and I'd been an admirer of their work since way before Muddy Knees Media. They had a sponsorship agreement with Continental Tires in about 2014, I think, which is, even now that would be an amazing get.
Do you know what I remembered the other day, Ian, that when I worked at this pub in Angel, it was a theatre pub, and I guess I was doing like some football sort of blogging at the time, but nothing anywhere close to professional, wasn't making any money. I completely forgot this until the other day. The Offside Rule came and did a live show in our theatre, and I can't remember if I got in touch with them or if they got in touch with the pub, but they were there, and they were sponsored by, again, it wasn't Continental Tires, but it was some like a huge global enterprise, and I remember thinking it was a sort of odd thing, yeah, lots of people came and they did a Q&A at the end, but they've been going for a long time, haven't they? It's a good show.
Yeah, they're great, and not only is it a good show, but it provides a platform for young female broadcasters that certainly in 2013, 2014 didn't really exist, but even now isn't as well developed. So they've been doing great stuff, and we were able to link up with them and immediately get them a deal with Spotify to do a nightly Women's World Cup show, which was fantastic. We were disappointed that of the many companies who came clattering forward to be associated with the Women's World Cup, they all vanished really, really quickly as soon as it ended, and we weren't able to get sponsorship for the WSL edition until quite late in the season, when Football Manager, who are wonderful, came in to support that show. So I think everyone can see the potential there, but we weren't able to get that commercial support in, which was a real shame, and it's one of the many reasons why the the sale to The Athletic is such good news for the listeners, because there's so much more security there now.
Well, let's talk about that then. You have been sold to The Athletic. What happened?
I think the acceleration of the industry really took me by surprise. I think in 2017 you were still in that period where you could have a conversation with a group of people about podcasts, and someone would put their hand up and go, "I'm really sorry, this might sound stupid, but what is a podcast?" It was still very much a kind of cottage industry with very few exceptions.
Whereas now that person has a podcast.
Yeah. And probably owns a podcast production company too. And it just absolutely roared. I think the number of people who listened to podcasts in 2017 was about 3% of the population. Even now, it's not as high as you would think. It's about 21%. I think about 27% if you take out the over 65s. But and that is a lot of growth in a very short space of time. And I remember going to America in late 2018 to try and launch the MLS show, and also for a bit of a fact-finding mission. And I'm very much afraid that the fact-finding mission was much more successful. I went to New York and I went to speak to Audio Boom in their office there. I went to Brooklyn and went to Gimlet. And already I'm thinking, bloody hell. Gimlet's got like 27 studios, one of which is a special music recording studio, because they have musicians who will come in to write their theme tunes. And you're looking at that going, bloody hell. We still have to make sure we get the cheap tea bags. Yeah. And then I went to LA, and it was, billboards the size of houses for podcasts. And you're in a cab and the radio's on, and there's an advert for the podcast, which is on the billboard. And you're thinking, oh God, there's serious media planning going on here. And Muddy Knees media planning is just deciding whether the cricket's on the telly or the football's on the telly. America was so far ahead, and you know what happens. It eventually catches up. So I think shortly after that, we launched 2 shows. They're both great shows, really good people working on them, one on TV and one on musical theatre. And one did a little better than the other, but neither of them got the audiences that they would have got if they'd been released in 2016, 2017, because there was so much noise and so much competition, and it's so hard now to cut through and reach people. We had 2 really good shows that people would have loved, but there was no way of letting them know that they existed. So that was another kind of warning bell. And then I actually first met The Athletic in about May 2019, around about the time of the famous hotel meetings. And they came to visit us at Jazz FM, and we were talking about, their plans and advertising potential and things like that. And it was very clear from the start, these were very impressive people with a very clear idea of what was good and what was worth paying for. And I think even outside of audio, you can look at the way that we consume content now. And 5 years ago, the generally accepted wisdom was people will not pay for content. But now, I've got a Spotify subscription, a Netflix subscription, an Economist subscription. I pay for good stuff.
I've got a Wall Street Journal one I've been meaning to cancel for about 2 months. But they make you fucking call them, Ian. They make you and they're not there when you call them.
I had a New York Times one. It took ages to get rid of. People will pay for good stuff, and it was clear that they were going to do something big, and that was really fascinating. And it was around about this time that all these warning bells were starting to add up into the sense that we couldn't operate as we'd operated from 2017. We couldn't just get good people and do good shows and release them into the ether and hope that the audience was waiting there for them, because they were too hard to reach.
I mean, is it kind of done the same thing as TV or the music industry now as well, where like if you put a lot of money behind marketing something, it can be successful, and that's the difference. Not necessarily the quality of the show always, but that's one of the differences between something which reaches an audience and something that doesn't.
It definitely doesn't hurt. And again, it comes down to those 2 principles. What do people need? And why am I the person to satisfy that need? But there are loads of shows who tick those two boxes and don't get listened to because they've just got lost in the noise. It became apparent that the old trick of just sellotaping a celebrity onto the front of a good show, it wasn't enough anymore. You were getting 20, 25 high quality podcasts being released all in the same week. It was proving increasingly difficult to be heard. So internally, we have been talking about investment because by that point every time we'd made money, we'd reinvested it into the business in some way, either by making a new show like You're Dead to Me, which took, pilots and talent and time, or we invested in staff. In June 2019, we moved into the Soho Studios that I'm talking to, our own office, our own studio to give us more freedom. But it's really difficult to go from a team of 6 to a team of 12. It's really difficult to get the people who can make a difference at that point. Right now, we would be looking at, we'd need a social media specialist, a marketing specialist. We'd need another studio, 2 more producers, a project manager to keep everything going. When you've got that many people, you need increased human resources, some form of middle management.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and it wasn't going to be possible to build organically. We had essentially reached our zenith in about the summer of 2019. From that time, the eagle-eyed observers will have noticed that we weren't launching very many new shows of our own. We had pivoted hard towards corporate income. We'd brought in a member of staff specifically to go out to agencies and companies and talk about podcasts. We were, even in lockdown, we signed a deal to do a sort of internal podcast for a global corporation, because that's where revenue was. Revenue wasn't with, here's a great idea, let's get some great people and sort of hope it all works out. The industry had changed dramatically. And the more we spoke to The Athletic, the more ideologically, we'd always aligned anyway. Both parties believe in verified experts doing good stuff, no shortcuts, good stuff. So that bit was easy enough. And I guess what happened was kind of natural. We want the Totally Football Show to be the biggest podcast on the planet. And what we've got now is, it's like smashing open boxes of power-ups on a video game. There's so much more expertise and clout there. And it's, on a personal level, it's really weird because I've worked my tits off for 3 years and spent, morning, noon and night fretting and worrying and stressing and freaking out about every aspect of Muddy Knees Media. And the last 2 weeks has been kind of just handing it over to better people, people who can take it further than I ever could. I'm Joe Gargery sending Pip off to be a little gentleman. It's a really, really strange time, but for the Totally Football Show, for the League Show, for the Scottish Show, for the Offside Rule, it's such good news. It's such a fantastic opportunity to continue the building and the development.
Who are you handing it over to, Ian?
Well, producer Ben has got a promotion, so he's executive producer now. Executive producer Ben.
Yeah, lovely.
And I
don't know if that's going to catch on.
And the rest of the athletics audio department, who are fine chaps, one and all, they will do great things with the property now.
This is good. This is some reassurance for people listening, because of course, and I appreciate that both of us are having this conversation from our respective positions of having been recently acquired by The Athletic. But let's be honest, there is some cynicism that can be attached. I mean, a small minority of people, but people worry when their favourite thing gets sold to something else. They worry that it's not going to be what it was before, or that there's going to be some new thing which is going to change it. I certainly experienced some people doing that with Tifo. I'm sure you did with Muddy Knees as well.
Yeah, one of the many things I've learned in the last 3 years is that there are certain men on the internet who sound off about things and sound really certain about it and actually have no idea what they're talking about. And it always seems to be men. There may well be women who do it. I haven't encountered them yet. But there have been people who have said, oh yeah, I know what you're doing. You're going behind a paywall. You're going to make us pay for it. And they said the same when we launched. And I remember looking at message boards and things going, why do they all sound so certain of this? They don't. I'm the one here, and I know it's not happening. The Totally Football Show is a great big mainstream football show with a great big mainstream audience. Locking that up behind a paywall serves absolutely no purpose. That is not going to be a thing that happens. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Everything will remain the same. James will continue to host the show. The brilliant producer Charlie is continuing to produce the show. We'll have the same mix of our usual guests. I keep saying "our." It's not anything to do with me now. Have the same mix of guests and some really amazing new ones. They've already been starting to appear already, and the show goes from strength to strength.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not you now.
Not me.
What are you doing?
I'm going off to make different shows, making podcasts that aren't panel shows.
As part of The Athletic, I should qualify.
As part of The Athletic, I'll get some budget to play with and access to quite a lot of talent and some brilliant producers, and we'll have a whole load of new shows coming out. Some are brilliant and football centric, and some are a bit left field and a bit odd and are either going to fall on their arse or they're going to be amazing. But it's an opportunity to do some really creative stuff, and I'm very much looking forward to it. As I'm looking forward to not waking up at 3 a.m. having sweats and terrors about incoming VAT bills or corporation tax or so on and so forth.
So did what we've just done feel like a fairly accurate reflection of your career? Anything you want to add?
Well, I think we could have spent more time talking about Friday nights at McDonald's on Chelmsford High Street.
I agree.
I guess,
and the black bin bags.
We can do that in a pub. It will be a counselling session.
Yeah, okay. Ian, that was your life. Not that, but, thanks very much. Much appreciated. Hopefully we'll be able to listen to many of your new middle field and left field podcasts in the future. We'll certainly let Tifo listeners know as and when they begin to emerge.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Joe.